Very, very pertinent points here. And one of the reasons the DJCA is not actively here, they will be attending but not speaking today, as this event is slightly more focused on securing against drones and counter-drone technology. However, rest assured, the Ministry of Civil Aviation is parallelly tasked us with the job of putting together everyone's ideas and bringing them together. Yes, absolutely. Okay, so I'd like to request Mr. Samaddar to kindly share his point of view with us.
Good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here with Security Watch India to debate a topic of great topical and similar importance. The gathering here is itself a reflection of the importance of the subject. And first and foremost, I think we need to start using a different terminology than anti-drone. I don't want to say anything more on that, except to say that drones by themselves are a huge asset. And at NITI Aayog, we've been looking at drones and work with the civil aviation Ministry in drafting the regulatory framework. But the focus has been mostly on how drones can be used to actually build India. That is in terms of socio-economic issues, on the security front, and basically three issues. How ease of doing business can be bettered, how ways of doing business can be bettered, and how the cost of doing business can be bettered by using drones. Just to give you an example, Power Grid has got 180,000 circuit kilometers of power lines, and they have to be surveyed every 4 months. That's about 720,000 circuit kilometers of flying. Now, once the drone regulations, God be kind, whenever it is issued, this is going to create a huge opportunity, because what's happening in the power grid sector, and similarly for oil and gas pipelines, as you know, is that you're looking at a voluminous task. And my own sense is that, apart from the manufacturing sector, which is what we want to look at more closely, but I would think in the future, the drones technologies will open up the services sector. We'll probably find aggregators who will come in. And once aggregators come in, who will have 50 drones and 60 drones as owners, and they will be pushing this to operators. So one of the key recommendations that we had put out to Ministry of Civil Aviation was to make the distinction between owner and operator. And as far as the business point is concerned, as far as the job potential is concerned, it's going to be the services sector of the drones business which will actually create the jobs that we want in India. In addition to that, you would also have the rest of the supporting systems in terms of data analytics, a whole lot of artificial intelligence. For example, in the sector of mining, forests, agriculture, one of the areas that we looked at very closely was how do we provide benefits of the Prime Minister's Fasal Bima Yojana directly through the use of drones. How do we actually capture illegal mining? Everybody knows what's happening in the mining sector. But how do we actually do those volumetric analysis in real time and use drones for that? So basically, I would think that the future in drones is going to be moving towards aggregation, quite like the Ubers and Olas today. You would probably have businesses who will get into that sector. But as I said, innovation is not limited to industry itself. There are a variety of other people who innovate, and I don't want to mention it more strongly than I can. Criminals and terrorists also innovate, and I think we should be careful as to how their innovations can actually screw the whole drone system. Criminals can benefit from issues of infringing on privacy. They can eavesdrop, they can do industrial espionage, there can be data theft, there can be contraband, and there can be a whole lot of misuse. Some of them can be in a lighter vein, but many of those things can have huge repercussions on the entire ecosystem that will drive the growth of the drone business in India. And I think that's very important for us to make sure that whatever structures that we bring in should not result in situations that puts us in a bind. Because once we build these infrastructures and see all these investments are made, then we need to make sure that all our investments are safe, they're in some logical way, and it does not come to a dead end later on. Similarly, with terrorists, the mention was made how terrorists can use weapons, IEDs, and EMP, and toxic chemicals and biological stuff. So we need to be very careful on those aspects of the technology. So how do we go forward? So whilst drones, it makes good business sense. It provides India a great opportunity to develop into a smart country where you use all these technologies. We also need to understand that we have to have the basic infrastructure in place. Some of them were mentioned today. I would like to focus on 5 or 6 things. First and foremost is this whole business of drone traffic management system. Once the DGCA circular is ready, I would think this business will really grow because there's a huge demand from various ministries to do this at the state government level and even at the central government level. But none of that will happen until we have the national capacity to build these drones in India. And I'm here standing quite clearly to say drones should be a complete Make in India initiative, and everything that is required to make sure that it is Make in India should be put together by this audience here. And whatever is required, we should do it because that is where the future is. And how do we integrate all those technologies with artificial intelligence, data analytics, all the other technologies which give you the answers, we need to figure out. So in that situation, when we are going to find a whole lot of drones floating around, so to speak, we need a very sophisticated drone traffic management system. A drone traffic management system, as our road traffic management system shows, even after 70 years, we have not been able to prevent people from jumping red lights. So a drone traffic management system is an even bigger challenge. But we need to think about it, and how can we do this? One way to solve the drone traffic management system is to look at it in 2 parts. You know, you have portable systems which are very location specific. So you have a drone specific system, drone traffic management system in localized areas, and you have a persistent system where you actually want to control drones over a longer period of time. So that's one solution. But to make the drone traffic management system tick, mention was made about remote identification. And again, in remote identification, there are various technologies that we spoke about. I drew an analogy from the shipping world. You have an automatic identification system, which is an automatic broadcast system, which is broadcasting all the time your own, the ship's name, etc., voice details, just like a broadcast system. The second method could be an integrative system, you know, like an IFF. So whether if you want to integrate a system, whether it is okay or not, you need to put in a chip there which will tell you moment to transmit that, that you are okay, you're friendly or foe. To go further down this line, we also need to look at the entire ecosystem that would make sure that drones are flown safely and the security of this country is not compromised in any way. The safety of its citizens are not compromised in any way, and there are no disasters that we cannot handle. So this requires 3 things: detection, defeat, and destruction. Detection technologies can be simple detection, a host of them was mentioned, but how much of that actually works and how much of it works with the precision that we want it to work is an open question. Just remember, a drone moves at about 20 meters per second at a minimum, 30 meters per second maybe, 40 meters per second. So your reaction time is very, very less. And if your drone, so you need to balance that you should be able to detect the drone, query the drone, analyze that drone well before it becomes a threat to you. So the rapidity with which you do that is a function of the speed of the drone and the height at which it operates. So you need to work that mathematics out. So your drone detection systems have to manage the mathematics. Mention was made about specifications. Being an ex-Navy guy, I completely believe the specifications cannot be made by users. Believe me. I mean, I watch a television all my life. I've driven a car all my life, but somebody tells me to write specifications for a car for the next 22, I can't make it. Just because I'm a user of a car doesn't give me the capability to make specification for it. And I request that we do not make that mistake when we make specifications. And specifications cannot be on the input side. Kindly draw your specifications on the outcome side. How that outcome is to be achieved, leave it to the industry to deliver. That is where we can work on as users. You know, what is the outcome that we want? But unfortunately, we put down a whole lot of input specification. There should be frequency so much. There should be a dB level. That's not going to take us anywhere. So in whatever specifications this task force is doing, let's look at outcome-driven specification rather than input-driven specification, which is a major fallacy which occurs every time we make specifications. The second, after you've done this detection, etc., then the rules of engagement have to be clearly specified. You know, how do you escalate? At what level? And when will you sort of detect, when will you defeat, and when will you destroy? Because the drone is the property of somebody. It might be a well and legitimate use for which that drone is flying for whatever purpose. So we need to find out some rules of engagement and how do we do that. And there are, I think, substantial amount of information on how to escalate on the rules of engagement in the services. some models from that can be taken up. The other issue is, of course, when you look at all this, the whole necessity of being able to integrate and coordinate. These are the two basic pillars on which any functional system will have to work. On what are the systems that you will integrate? The first thing that comes in mind is to be able to integrate sensors. But not only integrate sensors, you also need to integrate the sensors, like a system of systems. There's a group of sensors here, a group of sensors here, a group of sensors there. You need to integrate that. And how can you do that? There are lots and lots of technologies that will deliver it for you. And much of that can be done through multispectral data fusion techniques. You can actually create a composite situational awareness picture of the whole drone environment. So that gives you the assurance that you are able to locate, identify, classify, including the operator. And that technology is available today, that you can actually identify the operator, so without alerting him, which is more important than catching the drone itself. Then how do you provide notice? I mentioned to you. Okay. Then this whole business of countermeasures, where we spoke about detecting and defeating. So what kind of countermeasure systems that we bring in? And these all have to be framed in some objective, rational way in how do we handle countermeasures against drones. Essentially, there are basically two silos. There's a kinetic countermeasure and there's a non-kinetic countermeasure. Kinetic countermeasures will give you hard kill options, and non-kinetic will give you soft kill options. But the moment you go kinetic, that gives you this whole business of lasers. Somebody's been talking about shooting them down with firearms. I think that's a bit just your dip and drift of your bullet will not hit it. And to calculate the future position of a drone requires a fairly sophisticated fire control system, which I don't think is like a skeet shoot. You're not shooting down skeets. Here is a drone which can operate in sort of various ways. So we need to understand what kind of countermeasure systems that will bring in from a kinetic side. The moment you talk non-kinetic, that's the time when you're looking at interventions from the electronic spectrum. The moment you go electronic, you're now tied up with the WPC. And they have very strict rules on what you can transmit and what you can't transmit, whether you can jam, whether you can't jam, where can you jam it, where you cannot jam it. So there are major issues there, believe me. This countermeasures may be easy to say on a piece of paper, but to actually get all the government and the ministries put together to have one comprehensive countermeasure doctrine will have several repercussions. Then there's also the business of training. Technically speaking, the US operator and the counter US operator are both pilots. So you have to have both these systems run by pilots, and you need to build that expertise of giving them at least a personal pilot license, ability to understand avionics, ability to understand aerodynamics. Some basic crew training has to be provided for the pilot and crew. This also leads on to research and testing and standardization. I think a mention was made on that. Standardization is a big issue, and I think unless we standardize and get all these things in terms of motor specifications, in terms of I'm talking about standards, motors, your rotors, your landing gear, whatever you want to do, they have to be standardized and they have to be proven to be safe, and those things we need to work on. Next point would be on partnerships. As we can see, this is not a simple task. There's a huge mix of technology and the legal law enforcement agencies here. We need to figure out a balance as to how this can be worked out by bringing in experts. Now suddenly the Indian police services can't start hiring a whole lot of pilots to run this. Maybe you want to outsource it. So there has to be some authorized partnership model. Like I said, aggregators, who are drone aggregators can outsource their services to the police services or the other security agencies for doing it. But those partnerships, memorandums, and the agreements have to be well thought through. And how do we build those partnerships so that both sides are covered in terms of insurance, in terms of third-party liability, and things like that. Of course, in any of these stories, the most important point is the authority, accountability, and responsibility matrix. Who's authorized to do what is he accountable for, and what his responsibilities are, particularly for the owner, for the operator, and the legal environment, the state police authorities, the CUS authority. So that brings me to the last few things. First is, of course, is the infrastructure issues. If India has to move on this track of rapidly bringing in UAVs technology, we can't just start from scratch. The entire ecosystem has to be built up, and that requires a whole lot of infra issues. Everything that we do in our country, we forget the infra part, and we actually get going first before we have thought through what is required to do it. And I've said, for example, a mention was made about some of the places which need counter-UAS systems. I would think all VAVPs must have counter-UAS systems, not just airports. The parliament must have a counter-UAS system. The Rashtrapati Bhavan must have a counter-UAS system. The Prime Minister's house must have a counter-UAS system. All our nuclear installations must have counter-UAS systems. Many of our communication hubs must have counter-UAS systems. In some places, including television transmission systems, must have a counter-UAS systems, because you can actually inject into broadcast malicious stuff. So it's not just limited to some bloody airport here and there. It's across the line, and this requires very good, deep thinking through as to what are the places in this country where we need the counter-UAS system. This will actually give us a measure of the business, and all the people from the business community should be now looking at the opportunity that this creates. But whatever you do, please make in India, and all that exists in India. You can do it. Then I spoke to you about charter and operators. I think I'll leave that. I'm probably outside of our time. The US has already moved forward on this, and they have got a draft regulation called the S2836 regulations on how counter-UAS systems law has to be brought into practice. And I think we can look at those provisions there. Some of them are very specific to the US, but there's no harm looking at that document and seeing what we can imbibe and make it more topical and relevant for our country. So I've dealt on a variety of issues. I wish I had more time to discuss many of them, but I'm very glad that there's such an audience here who are concerned about counter-UAS systems. And I think it's time to drop the anti word and introduce the counter word, so that it's not as if you're looking at drones as a menace. Drones are important for us, and we can't walk away from it. But I think the important word, as was mentioned, is not anti, but counter. Thank you very much for your patient hearing, and if there are any questions, I'll be happy.